What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. Today we're going to be taking a look at a hand that happened on Live at the Bike. I thought this one was pretty good. Let's go ahead and jump into the action.
You just figured it out. You just outplay me. Get the old rep player where he wanted him, you know, out of position. If the jack don't come, I call. And then
Don't come in the exposed card.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. God. I wanted that fold so bad.
I'm trying to figure out how much he has. I can't see.
E-bounty was 10k, so he wants 10 plus. 11.5, wasn't it?
Pocket kings for Gary,
Okay.
as Andy raises it up with ace-6 of hearts. Abe makes the call, and Gary in the straddle. We're playing 50, 100, 200 with an ante right now. Gary with a big 3-bet to $2,500 with pocket kings. And Andy makes the call.
Probably 7:30.
Yeah, again, I just really can't see what he's working with here.
There's a lot going on pre-flop before we jump into the hand, so I just want to set the stage here and talk a little bit about what's happening. So the game is 50, 100, 200. I assume the 200 to straddle tends to happen on Live at the Bike, but there's also an ante in play. I believe it is a $100 ante because it's 50, 100. I think with a $100 ante and then a $200 straddle added in. So we're going to approach this hand assuming that that is the case, and let's go ahead and take a look at this open. Andy decides to raise to 3x the straddle with ace-6 suited in the cutoff. Definitely the standard play here from Andy. Now on the button, Abe looks down at jack-4 suited. Should probably just let this one go. If you did want to play the jack-4 suited, I might go for a little bit of 3-bet, put him to the test, knock those blinds out, have a better chance to win the pot. If you do want to play garbagey hands, you should probably raise, give yourself the best chance. Now what happens if you get squeezed? And then obviously most flops will be bad. Just ditch this one pre, but if you have to play it, put him to the test. Abe does decide to make the call on the button with jack-4 suited, and the action folds to Gary in the straddle with pocket kings. Now, this is a no-brainer. Obviously, you're going to squeeze kings. Typically, in the straddle in this spot, you're going to be squeezing a relatively tighter range because you do have that option to call pre-flop. So you want to squeeze, and you want to squeeze big. He decides to go for $2,500, a bet that is, frankly, far too small.
Gary with a big 3-bet.
One of the best parts about No Limit Hold'em is that it's no limit. You're not constrained with what you want to bet. In fact, if you could only bet or raise the size of the pot, well, that game sounds terrible. Anyway, back to the action. He should really look to make this more in the vicinity of $3,500. And I have a few reasons why. First off, you're out of position. Typically speaking, out of position, you want to make your raises much bigger than they would be in position. Then also, it is an ante game, so you kind of have to factor that into your raise size. He did make it pot, so I'm assuming that he did. But also, and this is a little bit more of an exploitative adjustment that you guys might want to consider making, when you're in these looser, splashy type games, go bigger. People don't care. They want to see flops, and so you want to get as much money in with an edge against their range as possible. So typically in this situation, you got to read the room. If there are guys flatting opens with jack-4 suited versus 3x's on the button, well, with jack-4 suited, then you're going to definitely want to be raising on the bigger side. I think my standard here, if I was playing in a game, would be 2,800, 3K, something like that. In a game like this, I have no problem going $3,500, $4,000. Back over to Andy with ace-6 suited. I think he's going to simply have to flat here. They are quite deep, so that's a factor in play. As you get deeper, the suited ace hands become stronger because they make the type of hands that can play for all of it. And when you got a lot of money and you're in position, that's a good spot. It's also worth saying from time to time, once in a blue moon, wouldn't mind making a move with a 4-bet here, but I do typically prefer the hands like ace-5 suited that have that extra playability from being able to hit the wheel. Now on the button, jack-4 suited, well, it should have folded the first time, so what's one more? And let's take a flop.
We have a potential huge pot brewing. $2,500 three ways. And a deuce 7-9
King chip.
rainbow flop. Gary out front with pocket kings.
Really such terrible people who gave it the wrong number.
Yeah.
Yes. 28,000.
600.
Check.
And Gary is going to check
He's got an Alex Torelli
to
back.
trap.
He's got an Alec Torelli.
He checked.
Yeah. 32-50.
Wow, Art.
That
was almost very slick.
Andy
I have no
fires
I didn't realize it was
32-50 with ace high and a backdoor flush draw.
The bet was 22, guys. The chip was right here, right? So I was like, over here, start shuffling. I'm like this.
Oh.
I never realized I did that.
That's what they always do, right? I didn't realize.
I swear, I was 20.
Gary, of course, going nowhere with pocket kings.
Honestly,
shuffling and just sucked that chip.
honest to God.
He's going to make the
32.50.
call.
I'm like, is that 22.50? I swear.
And we have over $14,000 in the pot.
The flop comes 9-7 deuce, and this is where our hand starts to take a turn, with Gary electing to check his pocket kings. Now, I've looked a lot at this spot, and I feel like what a lot of the best players are doing is primarily betting kings on this board, but then occasionally checking. So when we see Gary check here, it's not necessarily bad. I saw a lot of the comments on this video where people were really upset about the check, that he played this hand terribly. And don't get me wrong, if you're always checking kings or mainly checking kings on a board like this, then it is quite bad. But you do want to from time to time have a strong hand like kings on these low boards when you check. Otherwise, your checks are very obvious. So when I see this in one hand, I don't mind the check from Gary as long as he does realize that you should mainly be betting. This is where Andy starts to look to make a move and decides to bet here on the flop three-way. This is a pretty dangerous bet to me, particularly when you look at the stack size of the player on the button who has Jack 4 suited. Well, he's only got 9K behind into a pot of around 10K, so he's going to be committed if he flops pretty much anything here. Any pair for sure, certainly an open-ender. He might even just go with it if he has a hand like Jack 10 suited. So this is a spot where it's not really that attractive to bluff. He shouldn't be looking to put as many hands into that flop bet range. Now, that doesn't mean he shouldn't bluff. And ace-6 suited is a kind of reasonable hand to do it. You get a lot of turns that you can barrel on. Obviously, a heart is going to be great for you. You pick up the nut flush draw. If an 8 comes, you have an open-ender. There's a decent amount of playability on the turn here, so I don't mind the hand selection. I don't mind mixing this in from time to time, but it should be noted that three-way with a short stack behind, you should make this move way less often because you are sometimes going to get your hand caught in the cookie jar. And that's not to mention the fact that the guy who 3-bet can still have some good hands too. At this point, Jack 4 suited makes a very disciplined laydown on the 9-7 deuce flop, and the action's back over to Gary with his pocket kings. Cowboys. All right, well, this is why we set the trap here. This is definitely a spot you're going to be looking to check call. On shorter stack depths, they are around, like, let's just say 250 blinds deep here. On shorter stack depths, this is the type of hand you might want to mix in some check raises. In fact, that's one of the best parts about this hand is on 100 big blind stacks. If people start trying to bet with a 9 or pocket 10s or pocket jacks, you can look to stack them with a check raise line. But on this stack depth, I think I generally do prefer a check call if you are going to check. Now, you should probably, in theory, be check raising this occasionally, but generally speaking on this stack depth, I do prefer a check call if we do decide to check. Gary does decide to call, and let's take a turn.
Are over $40,000 deep each. Turn is a brick. Andy's still with ace high.
I have long arms, guys.
Don't worry, you probably already got me for like 6K.
Yeah, me too.
Impressive, you got the other
He
dollar.
made like change 8 times already. I haven't even noticed.
Especially about selling up 16,000.
Yeah, Armenian mic change.
Nick, you know you had two $1
$10,000.
chips.
What?
You had 2 of those blue chips a second ago.
I don't. Oh, he took one of those?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's alright.
Party trick.
And Andy bets $10,000 into $14,000. And Gary makes the quick call.
The turn comes the 4 of diamonds, and I've got something I want to talk about. I'm not planning on playing much poker in the near future, and I don't even know if that's going to change. But whether it does or not, I'm going to keep making these YouTube videos. I like making them, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I feel like people might have been a bit confused on my last video. I'm not leaving making YouTube videos. I'm leaving playing poker. Also, nothing gets my day going better than waking up to see 20 comments more about me talking too much in a poker hands video. Those same people are probably loving this scene right now. So don't stress out. Even though I might not be hitting the felt, I'll still be right here making some YouTube vids. Well, by here I mean here and my other channels. I'll be doing some videos. You get the point. I'll put a link in the description below. Fuck. The turn comes in offsuit 4. Once again, Gary checks as he should with all of his hands. Now the question is, should Andy continue to barrel? And I'm going to go ahead and say I think the answer to that is no. Now, sure, you can really do this a few percentage of the time, and it's probably not going to be too bad. In fact, maybe it's good to do that. But the reason that I don't like barreling here with ace-6 suited is simple. We have so many other better hands to continue to barrel with. Hands like ace-X of diamonds, hands like ace-3 suited, hands like ace-5 suited, hands like jack-10 suited, hands like 10-8 suited. You guys can see where this is going. Typically speaking, on boards where you have many of good bluff hands to choose from, you shouldn't go with the air balls. And then on boards that don't have a lot of good hands to choose from, you should get pretty crazy with some of them. A good example board might be if this flop was king 8 deuce turn 4. Well, then you're going to have to be a little more liberal with what you decide to bluff with, including sometimes running with pure air. But on this flop, do we have to do that? I really don't think that we do, but Andy thinks otherwise. Andy does decide to bet $10,000 here on the turn. His hand is starting to heat up now. Over in Gary's shoes, he's facing a big bet, and he knows he might face a river jam as well. In Gary's shoes, we gotta start to break down what our range looks like and the way that we're gonna fight back against this. Okay, for starters, we're gonna have all of the overpairs occasionally, but we are a little more likely to have a hand like 10-9 suited or ace-9 suited. Those hands should be a bit more likely to want to check on the flop. Now, in this situation, I think that we're gonna have to fold occasionally with some overpairs, but we want to mainly continue. So what are our worst hands to continue with? Well, I think I can let go of a hand like 10s. That one seems particularly bad because we do block 10-8 and jack-10. These could be some of the more common bluffs. And I also might be a little more likely to let go of some hands that have diamonds in them because now they're less likely to have a flush draw when you do have the diamonds. So I think when we have overpairs without a diamond, particularly ones that aren't 10s, we're going to simply have to always call those jacks through aces. They're just too strong within the rest of our range. We can fold 10s, maybe fold jacks with a diamond. Queens through aces with a diamond I think is still too strong. We're going to have to call here. And then there are some other hands we're probably going to look to fold. Maybe if we did check call a hand like ace queen of spades. Maybe if we decide to check call a hand like jack 10 suited. We're going to mix that in every now and then. Maybe if we had a hand like ace deuce suited, can let that guy go. And then certainly these 7x hands that aren't also diamonds, we're going to let those go too. So you can see we're gearing up here. We're letting a few hands go and we're preparing for the river. If you don't start thinking about this stuff early, you're not going to know what to do in the river. And that's a really important thing to think about when we're analyzing this hand. Anyway, eventually Gary does decide to make the call, and let's take a river.
Andy barreling with ace high, over $34,000 in the pot. He has about a pot size bet left,
That hand against you hurt me.
give or take.
The ace is one guy, just makes me sick.
And will Andy go for it? Does he have it in him to bluff shove here on Gary? If he does, Gary will be in a 6 spot with pocket kings. He's trapping.
All in?
And look at this. Andy does shove all in. Are you kidding me? If Gary makes this call, it would be a more than $100,000 pot.
And there's no way you're bluffing there, so yeah.
What's that?
Talking to Dan.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Sorry.
You're not giving
I would
Gary
not.
advice?
No. Talking to Dan about our one hand.
30 plus 32,
Take your time, Gary.
34. It's on
It only
fold.
takes so much.
You got 5 minutes right there.
Yeah, the count.
35.
Gary checked flop to trap to get Andy to bet worse. When Andy bets so big on the turn,
26, 30, 34.
Gary
35,
is still
36,
trapping,
8,
but maybe a little bit concerned
30,
that Andy could have
37,
a set.
The river comes a board pairing deuce. This is a really interesting card because Now it's less likely Andy has a value bet. If he had 9-7 suited, that's counterfeit. If he had pocket deuces, it's quads, which is still definitely ahead of aces, but it's way less likely now because only one combo. So this river is certainly a good river for Gary's range. Now, Gary does decide to check. I think that's fine when Andy bets this big on the turn. He is saying he has quite a strong hand. And now the action's on Andy. With ace-6 suited here, I wasn't a big fan of the turn bet, but I do think if you are going to bet the turn, this is one of your better hands to fire the river with. The reason is that because you don't have a diamond, you don't block any of the flush draws that could check, call, check, call, check, fold. Also, having an ace makes aces a little less likely, which I think is maybe one of the main call hands you should be concerned about. And so I think I like this hand a bit more as a bluff than a hand like queen, jack of diamonds. And he does decide to pull the trigger and moves in, covering Gary for what will be over a $100,000 pot if Gary decides to call. Before we talk about what Gary should do, I want to talk about something that happens to players a lot when they play poker, and there's this kind of like leveling game that they fall into, which is, oh, this river is a bad river to bluff, right? Because now if Gary has an overpair, it's much less likely he's beat. So people won't bluff there, right? So if nobody bluffs, then I shouldn't call because no one's going to be bluffing me. But if you never call, well, then bluffing becomes good again. And what I really want you to do is to stop thinking like that. Let's just take a nice balanced approach here, which is overall this card is fairly good for us. Let's create a reasonable call strategy. If he never bluffs, then yes, he will always stack us when he jams and we call, but then we never get bluffed off of our equity and we end up winning the pot a lot. What Gary should do here is kind of interesting to me. I think if his hand contains a jack, 10, 8, or diamond, those are cards you probably don't want to have. If your hand contains a 9 or a 7, those are actually cards you really do want to have. And if your hand contains a high diamond, it's probably a little more neutral but somewhat bad. So let's think about the kinds of hands that we are calling on the turn. We're getting rid of some of the 10s, occasionally some jacks, a lot of the 7x that aren't diamonds. We're getting rid of a lot of those holdings. So, you know, one of the hands that sticks out to me, or some of the hands that most stick out to me as calls, are if you decided to 3-bet with a hand like 10-9 suited or jack-9 suited or ace-9 suited in the big blind. Those are some of your absolute best possible calls. And the reason is because the main value bets that Andy is representing here are pocket 9s and pocket 7s. Yes, he is occasionally saying he has a hand like ace-deuce suited. Maybe occasionally has a hand like pocket 4s that bluff flop. But his main value bets that he's saying he has are 9s and 7s. I also think 4s is even less likely because betting the flop with 4s with a short stack behind is a very questionable play. Now when you get jammed behind, you don't even know what to do. Probably fold, but he could have draws. So I really do think that he's saying he has 9s or 7s here. And if you do have a 9 or a 7 in your hand, then you're going to block a bunch of the value range. You know, maybe he has 7 or 8 combos of value. If you have that 9 or 7, now he's only going to have 6. And I know that it sucks. You don't want to play 500 big blind pots with one pair. But here's the thing. If people go ballistic against you, particularly deep, you're going to have to sometimes find calls because sometimes they will be going after you. If you're not going to be comfortable creating a good range and going with your strategy, then you probably shouldn't be playing this deep. We are not going to be 3-betting hands with a 9 out of the big blind nearly as much as the overpairs. But the overpairs are mainly going to bet the flop. In fact, ace-9 probably mainly going to bet the flop as well. So do we have enough hands to call here if we only call when we occasionally have a hand like trap top set and then a few 9s? No, we're going to have to call some overpairs as well. So which overpairs make the most sense? The ones without a diamond make more sense to me. The ones that don't block straight draws make more sense to me, although we've already folded some of those. So I think in this situation, if you want to take like a reasonable approach to it, I would say you should probably be calling with these hands, queens through aces, something around a third to half of the time. I know that's not the answer you want. You want me to say, guys, fold here, or guys, call here. But if you only call with 9x and traps, you're going to fold too much. And if you call all your overpairs, you're going to call too much because you need some folds too, right? You have some diamond hands you're probably going to want to get rid of. But other than that, you know, your range is more overpair based than it is flush draw based. So we need to find a way of deciphering that. I think overpairs with a diamond, you could probably let go. over pairs without a diamond, you're going to have to call something in the vicinity of half the time. I mean, that's just the way this is going to have to be. This is a bet that's actually slightly over the pot size, or really, it's just about the pot size. We're going to have to break it down. So whether that means you want to flip a coin, or you want to figure out maybe you always call aces, you always fold kings, that's fine. But this is a legitimately tough spot for Gary. And whenever the answer is call, sometimes fold, sometimes, you just want to mix it up and do a little bit of both. That's right, guys. You tuned in for another exciting episode of You Can Fold, Call, or Raise. Except you can't raise it. You can fold or call. We've determined that Gary should occasionally call here. But what does Gary think? Does he think his opponent has the goods? Or does he think he's just making a move? Sometimes you just got to dig deep and go with your instincts. And that's what Gary decides to do.
And when Andy shoves this much in the river, Andy is telling him that he has pocket sevens, pocket nines, or quad deuces. 7 combinations of hands. 3 combinations of sevens, 3 combinations of nines, 1 combination of deuces. Those are the hands that Andy is representing here. 7 value hands, 7 value combinations, and that's it. He can have a lot of bluffs here if he's going to bluff all of his missed draws. Hands like 10-8 suited, Jack-10 suited, 8-6 suited. Hands that turn diamond draws.
A lot of chips.
You only get 30 seconds to act on the river, but each of those time extension chips are worth 1 minute, and Gary's going to use all of them here. He has 5 to use.
This is a lot to give you in one hand. God damn, dude.
As far as I remember, this is the first time we've seen Andy do something like this. Triple barrel, shove pot on a stone cold bluff. I can't remember another hand, especially in a pot this size, that we've seen Andy do this. And that's got to be crossing Gary's mind. He knows that Andy doesn't do this very often. If this is against certain other players, it would be an easier spot for Gary to make the call. But against Andy, someone who you don't see bluff off $50,000 very often, it's a really tough spot for Gary.
Can I give you the chip yet or no?
No.
Okay.
Take your time. You only one.
What?
Gary has 2 black kings, so he doesn't block any turn diamond draws. He doesn't block any straight draws. And he has 7 combinations of value here, 7s, 9s, and deuces. Yeah, he could have aces, but that's very unlikely.
Like a good day is going to turn into a really bad day.
If he knows that Andy is always bluffing with all of those misdraw hands, then it's a call. But if he thinks Andy is under bluffing, then it's a really tough spot for Gary to make this call for a $100,000 pot.
A lot of big blinds.
Gary is going to use all of his time extension chips to think this through.
Are you capable of having 5-6 here? Jack 10.
makes it a lot tougher with the action clock. 30 seconds to act, and then 1 minute for each time extension chip. Each player gets 5 chips to use, and Gary has all of his 5 right now to use. They were recently replenished because the game started before the stream. So they started about an hour before the stream, and they were replenished
Taking advantage of me.
a little while ago. So Gary has all 5 of his time extension chips, and he's going to use all 5 of them to use a full 5 minutes to think. You got to give a ton of credit to Andy here for having the balls to make this play. Not many players can do this. Andy understands he has an image that usually has it in this spot. He doesn't have an image like certain other players who do bluff a ton, who have shown up with a ton of bluffs on stream. Andy's the type of player that has a crazy image, but an image that has it in these types of spots. And that's got to be going through Gary's head right now.
Uh-oh.
5.
I suck.
Would you have like kings or something?
The good thing, you'll get to see it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good.
What'd you have? Big pair? So how do you know? What? Kings, right? Yeah, I was gonna say kings. 8, yeah, kings.
He walked his hand back.
What?
He walked his hand back.
Wow,
Oh, you
what
saw it.
a stone cold
Oh, I didn't
bluff
see it.
by Andy.
Yeah,
Gary
yeah. Oh, I
wanted
didn't
to
see it.
make the
Oh, so
call,
you saw
but just
king, yeah.
couldn't do it. You got to give a ton of credit to Andy. What an amazing
Andy,
bluff.
Andy.
One of the sickest bluffs we've ever seen on Live at the Bike.
Queen.
Oh my god, if you were bluffing there, dude.
Thanks for joining me for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I am making some vids on other channels. If you want to check that out, you can feel free to check out the links in the description below. If not, that's cool. Still making some poker content right here. I'll see you guys again soon.